In this first video, I will lay the groundwork for this lecture by recounting a story that tends to be retold in the West, the one we tend to describe as modernity. Modernity encapsulates a kind of narrative that we in the West in particular are brought up on, and which many of us therefore certainly tend to support. It suggests that we are part of a specific group of people, those who are, so to speak, modern, which is a group of people you want to be a part of. To be modern means to renounce something, to throw off a burden that people carried before we became modern. In other words, you have to make a break with a time before modernity, which we usually call pre-modernity. The pre-modern era is described from this modern narrative as a time of ignorance, where one's intellectual deficit was filled by beliefs in gods, spirits, and demons. In line with the sociologist Max Weber, what he argued, modernity implies a form of disenchantment with the world, where previous pre-modern approaches to faith and truth had to be re-evaluated. It was no longer self-evident that one believed in a god, for example, but became one option among many others. It could therefore be said that modernity is the sore story of how humanity took control of their future and they developed their own criteria beyond the religious ones for what constituted the truth during pre-modernity. What is interesting for our purposes is that we can see contours of a narrative that assumes that there is a difference between a time when a religious worldview was more or less self-evident, one where it became one option among many others. As you might imagine, for some, this was not just a story about a new way of looking at the world, it was also a story about the liberation of mankind from the constraints of religion. One of them was the world-famous atheist Joseph Lewis, who wrote, "The enlightened and completely emancipated man from the fears of God and the dogma of hate and revenge would make him a brother to his fellow man. He would devote his energies to discoveries and inventions which theology previously condemned as defiance of God, but which have proved to so beneficial to him. He would no longer be a slave to a God and live in cringing fear." What Lewis is expressing here is a generally accepted modern account of Western history, that there was a time in Europe when the Church, with its headquarters in Rome, had a virtually unchallenged position of power. Its rule encompassed everything and everyone, and no one, least of all secular thinkers, had any way of challenging this authority. As Lewis argues, it was therefore necessary for the enlightened modern man to free society from this ecclesiastical control so that a new world order for new discoveries and inventions could be made. If, on the other hand, this liberation had never taken place, the Church would continue to suppress human progress and continue to keep the world in a dogmatically sanctioned darkness. So, here we begin to see why the development of science was necessary. For us to be able to live in a modern reality, a reality that is not bound by religious power, we must find new ways of seeking knowledge. When God dies, as the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, man is left alone in the world, forced to navigate in the new modern landscape. Therefore, man will encounter many phenomena that he finds difficult to explain. On these occasions, certain involves, particularly those with a religious orientation, may appear to remind us that life is a mystery and that man must therefore return to more traditional models of explaining the world. However, since the moderns have left behind the naivete of pre-modern age, they do not accept such attempts to desecularize the world by reintroducing old illusions. Instead of wonder, the moderns accordingly experience the unexplained as hitherto unsolved puzzles that they will one day solve. Therefore, the moderns experience a sense of freedom because they can finally rationally search for the truth without having to be seduced by religion. So this is where the development of science becomes so important as a means of maintaining the modern ideal of knowledge. To the extent that there are unresolved issues, they are those that modern science have not yet managed to explain. Modern development is therefore linear, and the line points to the coming perfection of truth. This utopian dimension of modern thinking has been described as the myth of progress. This myth asserts that because of modernity, advancements will be inevitable. Moreover, because these advancements are seen as progress, the retellers of the myth think that these advancements are also beneficial. The death of God entails for the modern specifically such a progress. Accordingly, modernity is, as the philosopher Charles Taylor writes, an upbeat story of the progress of triumphant scientific reason. Part of this modern story is thus how, in order to make further progress, humans developed and turned to scientific methods. Modernity thus meant a shift in how people understood themselves in relation to religious traditions and authorities. Religion became something that could be pursued in the private sphere, but for society as a whole to move towards a brighter future that was not characterized by pre-modern superstition and fantasy, society had to be developed on the basis of secure knowledge. That is, the knowledge that science could provide. The development of science therefore meant that it was practically possible for modern man to emerge, because he was given the tools of knowledge that made it possible to challenge the authority of religious traditions. So this description of modernity is far from complete. What is missing is how, for example, political, economic, artistic, and educational institutions were shaped by modernity. The history of development described here is also very simplified. Among other things, it has not progressed in such a linear fashion and thus not always in a specific way everywhere. Instead, we can see that modernity has developed many different kinds of modern societies, some more religious, whilst others more secularized. For example, there's a big difference between the religiosity of Sweden and in the United States, even though they are both considered to be modern nations. But what I have shown is that the development of modernity cannot be understood independently of a critique of religion, and that modern science was what created an alternative to religious pursuit of truth. This modern narrative has been formulated with the help of Auguste Comte, when he argued the need for a positivist approach to knowledge in order to advance human progress. And to his thinking, we will be turning in the next video.